like another minute to hop on, and then I think I'll respect the time for the people that showed up on time and just kind of get started.
Sarah, I have to ask, tell me about the violins and why that was your chosen image.
Yeah, thank you. So I chose the violins because when I saw this, I'm imagine these individuals are in an orchestra, and my husband and me and Brandon are actually taking guitar lessons right now. And in order to be, a professional musician, it takes hours and hours of practice and dedication. And when you go and see a live symphony, everyone is playing, there's a synergy, there's a lot of effort and time that goes into making sure everyone hits their cues and, plays in sync, and there's a flow and a vibe to creating harmony. And so when I think of motivation, I think, wow, what does it take to sit down for, 5 to 7 hours a day and practice an instrument to one day end up being in, the LA Philharmonic or a professional, orchestra or symphony. So I chose this image for motivation because an individual would have to be very disciplined and harness some, motivational powers to dedicate that much time to get to where they need to be. And, I kind of relate that to real estate. The more we put into it, the more we get out of it, the more we, put into our practice and follow up and rapport building and dedication. And so I kind of paralleled this image with the time and energy and effort that goes into real estate, and how that all relates to motivation. So thank you for asking. And I wanted to put
there had to have been a story. I knew there was something there.
Yeah, I wanted to, put something that's outside the box that we don't normally think about. I think, any real estate related workshop, there's always like a salesperson or someone in a business suit. And I really want everyone today to start thinking outside the box when it comes to motivation. So I wanted to start right out the gate with an image where how can we think about motivation differently than what we're told or how we think, how we typically get motivated or work ourselves into motivation or what we experience during lack of motivation. So definitely want to elicit some out of the box, mindsets here. So I'm going to get started. It's 1:06, and thank you everyone for showing up today and just being a part of this workshop. You may notice on the side here that there are several speakers, and Joanna is taking the time as people join the room to make them speakers. I want this to be collaborative. As the title says, it's increasing productivity through science with an emphasis on learning about motivation. And, hearing the word science might be intimidating or, well, I'm not a scientist. Like, am I going to understand what's happening here today? Are we going to get into formulas and chemistry sets? What's going on? So in order to make this digestible and for all of you to really understand and grasp the message here today, I want it to be a collaborative workshop where you speak up. If something doesn't make sense, if I'm moving too fast, if I speak some jargon that you're not really understanding, let me know so I can break it down. I guarantee if somebody in this room has a question, somebody else is thinking about it. So no question is a stupid question. If you ask, you're probably asking for the majority. We're all kind of here together wanting to learn and grow. So we're creating a shared consciousness. And so let's all, integrate as one and collaborate today as we move forward and learn about motivation, increasing productivity through science. So to get started, I want to introduce myself for those of you that don't know me. My name is Sarah Arlington. The MS stands for Masters in Science. The BCBA is a board certified behavior analyst. That's me. I'm a super nerd, data driven. I love science. Anything where I can track and measure and make data driven decisions is what I'm all about. I'm also a performance engineer. That's where I took the science of behavior, spent 10 years in the field of autism and education, and came out on the other side of that working with 3 Keller Williams mega teams, being a performance engineer, onboarding, training, and really diving into helping agents be successful in accomplishing their goals. I'm a published scientific researcher and a former professor of Cal State LA. So if you're asking what qualifies me to speak to motivation in science, that would be it. But I'm not really here to talk about myself. I really want to learn, why are you here? Why did you show up to this rooms today? Some of you may be leaders, real estate coaches. You might run a team. You might just be an individual, a family member, a spouse, partner, and just want to learn about motivation in general. So to get started, we are going to share. And, oops, sorry about that. I have seemed to, okay, so we're going to share, and I want that to sit with everyone for a moment. And it looks like,
could you mute yourself, please?
All right. I've pulled up the wrong slide, so I'm going to reshare my screen here as we think about sharing. Okay. All right. So as I said, we are going to share. Oh my goodness, what is happening here? I apologize. I'm not sharing the right screen. Seems like technical difficulties. My apologies.
You're fine, Sarah. I was just going to say, sometimes you have to select, you can choose the window if that's helpful when you open up screen sharing. It can be.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, I think all right. Okay. So we're going to share. And here are the rules for sharing. Number 1, everyone must share. Number 2, your camera must be on when sharing. Number 3, your camera must be on when sharing. Number 4, I can use your share topic to set an example. Number 5, I will call on you at random. And number 6, you only get 30 seconds to share. Okay. End of experiment. All right. So please stay on. You're not going to share. So hopefully we didn't lose anybody in that experiment, because from some pre-testing, I got some interesting feedback from some colleagues of mine, and hopefully I didn't lose anybody. But I just ran a little experiment, and I'm kind of glad that I had that technical difficulty, because hopefully you really got time to sit with the idea of sharing. So my hypothesis when I shared the share slide and when I shared the rules for sharing was that one of these things happened. So up here, this person that's really excited is someone like me. And if I was just told I was going to share, my response is, oh my God, I can't wait to share. I hope I get picked on first. What are we going to talk about? I want to share. Some of you may be like this person in the box, like, what? I didn't show up to a rooms to share. I'm here to learn and listen to the speaker. You might have felt overwhelmed, like, well, what are we going to share about? Oh my gosh, like, what's the topic? Hurry up. I need to plan. I want to make sure I sound good and I impress people, because there's other people here in this room. Maybe some of you felt annoyed, like, oh my God, another thing where I'm gonna have to listen to people share. Like, I just want to learn about motivation. Why are we sharing? That's annoying. some of you may have, been a little curious or inquisitive, like, oh, we're going to share. What's the share topic? I wonder what it's going to be about. I might be interested in sharing, right? So my hypothesis is that based on who's here in the room today, one of you went through one of these states when I presented the screen to share. So the question is, how does that relate to motivation, right? I just did a little experiment. My hypothesis is that it elicited some sort of state or emotion in my audience. And the topic here is motivation and learning about the science of motivation. So how does what I did relate to motivation? So we're going to unpack that right now. And before we unpack it, I want to walk you through a definition of motivation that I've created before we dive into the science, because we're going to dive right in today. So my breakdown in the definition of motivation, which I want to set the platform for as we unpack this, because it is going to get a little sciencey, is motivation is a state. And I'll say that again. Motivation is a state that leads to a set of behaviors an individual engages in both internally and externally. Okay? Set of behaviors that an individual engages in both internally and externally within a specific context that results in a measurable outcome of performance or a performance target or another set of behaviors. And we will classify those as motivational, or say someone is motivated or someone is not motivated, right? And we would say they're not motivated because they're engaging in another set of behaviors, right? So the idea behind motivation or lack of motivation is something is happening, and something is happening related to a specific state that we are in. Okay, so I'm going to read through it one more time. Feel free, again, ask me a question if this isn't making sense, or if you're curious about a part of this. I broke it down into 3 separate components to kind of help us digest this before we dive into the scientific formula for motivation. So motivation is a state that leads to a set of behaviors an individual engages in. These behaviors are both internal and external within a specific context that results in a measurable outcome of a performance target or another set of behaviors. And then we would classify that individual, right, as being motivational, they're motivated, or we might say someone is not motivated, right? Now, what's important up here is I put both internally and externally because behavior happens within the skin, right? And that would be our internal verbal behavior when we're talking to ourselves. That is actually behavior. And you can measure that through the external observable behaviors that someone is engaging in. So I think it's really important that when we think about motivation and we think about a state that someone is in that leads to a set of behaviors that we would then classify as someone being motivated or not motivated, something is always happening, right? Either internally or externally. So I want to set the stage with that. Just kind of sit on that. Any questions, any thoughts before I move on that anyone wants to chime in, ask? No? Everyone's just absorbing that. All right. Very good. Okay, so here's the formula for motivation. Again, the presentation is the science, right? It's gonna get a little sciencey, but I'm gonna break this down today, okay? So this is the formula for motivation, and we call this a motivating operation. Behavior operates on the environment, right? And motivation involves a set of behaviors, right? And a state that leads to those behaviors. So when someone is motivating or motivation is taking place, it's because there's an interaction between the person and the environment, okay? So we're gonna start on the left and move our way to the right, And again, please jump in, ask questions. This is content that I would teach to graduate students that are in a behavioral science course. And I don't expect anyone here to be a behavioral scientist or have a high level understanding of applied behavior analysis. So please, please, please interrupt and ask questions if I'm going too fast or it's a little overwhelming. Okay, so our motivating operation works as such. The state, right, because we start out by saying motivation is an actual state. And at any given point in time, we are in one of two states, either a state of deprivation, we're deprived of something, and that leads to behavior, right? It evokes behavior, or we're in a state of satiation, right? We're satiated, that abolishes behavior, reduces the likelihood that behavior will occur. Okay, so again, motivation involves two states, a state of deprivation or a state of satiation. And we are constantly fluctuating between these two states any given moment throughout the day based on a multitude of contexts in the environment, right? Think about hunger, think about prospecting, think about wanting to go out and meet up with a friend. Like all these things involve these two states at any given point in time. And then there is cues and signals that exist in our environment. And this creates the context, right, that's related to the state, which then leads to a set of behaviors, right? Because again, I'm interacting with my environment, right? There's a cue or signal that happens, right? And my behavior either increases or my behavior decreases. And then based on how I behave or how I interact with the environment, there's some sort of consequence or outcome that takes place. Now, consequence is the scientific term for what follows behavior. It's not to be thought of as a consequence, like, oh, that's bad, they're gonna get a consequence. It's very objective. It's not a term related to good or bad. It simply means an outcome of behavior, right? I'm thirsty, right? I see my bottle of water, which is my cue. I take a sip, right? The outcome or consequence is my thirst is quenched, right? It's very, very simple in that respect. Okay, so here's our formula for motivation. This is the scientific formula for a motivating operation. All right. So now let's break this down even further, okay? So like I said, we are always fluctuating between two states, and that equals our motivational state, right? So a state of deprivation, which increases the likelihood of behavior, right? So if I'm really thirsty right now and I see water or a water device, right, that's going to increase the likelihood that I'm going to take a sip of water because I'm deprived, I'm thirsty, right? Or we're in a state of satiation, right? If I drink this whole water bottle, and even if it's in my environment and I see it, I'm not going to be motivated to go pick it up and drink from it, right? I'm probably going to engage in some other behavior and do something different, right? So that state of satiation can also be in play. And that creates a decrease in performance or behavior, right? Decreases the likelihood that something's going to happen. So these are the two states, really, really important because these two states set the stage for motivation. So for my leaders, my coaches, even my agents out there, it's really important to understand, well, what state am I in when I go to prospect? How am I feeling, right? Do I need to make money? That's state of deprivation, right? Did I just close a big escrow and got a $50,000 paycheck? I might be in a state of satiation, right? Those two states will determine what happens next in your environment. Okay, so moving on to the next breakdown of our formula is the cue and signal, right? Without cues and signals in our environment, we're not going to behave, we're not going to interact, right? We're going to exist in a vacuum. So cues and signals in our environment are very, very important. So bringing this back to the example of sharing and my experiment, right? When I put up that slide that said share, again, something happened inside of my audience, right? Based on a learning history that you have with sharing, right? The outcomes of your previous experience with sharing, some of you love positive attention, you love social accolades. When you're sharing and talking to other people, it's a positive experience. So when I brought up the share slide, some of you might have gotten a little bit excited. Oh, this is cool. I'm going to get the opportunity to share. Some of you, right, may have immediately felt a little social anxiety. Again, based on your learning history with specifically sharing, right? Maybe in the past you've shared and it didn't have a positive outcome, or you just are an introverted individual and you don't like speaking up. Maybe you have some preconceived notion about what other people are going to think about you when you say something or share, or maybe you think to yourself, I never say the right thing, it never works out in my favor. Oh my God, I can't believe this woman is going to make us share right now. Right? So something was happening in that moment based on that cue that I presented. So again, to my leaders, my coaches, my agents, what is in your environment at any given point in time that is contributing to how you perform, okay? And this is based on your learning history, right? Because we've all, had an opportunity to share, right, at some point. And so think about how your behaviors, right, in the past have resulted in some outcome and how that is predicated on your future behavior based on what's going on in your environment. Okay. I hope everyone's with me so far. Haven't had anyone jump in and ask any questions. I understand if you're the social anxiety person, you probably don't want to ask questions. But if you're the person that likes to share, please speak up so others can also take part in your question, because I'm sure guaranteed there's some questions cultivating within our shared consciousness right now. All right. So we're going to bring it forward even further through that formula, that cue that is related, right, to your learning history. Because when you see a cue come up, you're like, oh, okay, I have a learning history with water bottles, right? They have water in them. And I know when I drink, I quench my thirst, right? That cue and learning history immediately ties in to that state, okay? Because motivation is a state, and it's a result of the state that you're in, how you perform, right? But it's really important to understand the relationship between the state that you're in and the cues that show up in the environment. Because if the water bottle is not here and I'm thirsty, I'm not going to behave in relationship to taking a sip of water. I can't, it's not here. But I have another set of repertoires, such as walking downstairs and getting a glass of water. Or if I'm at a restaurant, I'm going to ask the waiter to bring me some water, right? But it's really important to understand that what exists in our environment as cues, right, relates to those states and how we interact. And the learning history based on those cues is important as well, right? And again, for my coaches and leaders, that also relates to how we interact with the people around us, right? Based on their states and what their learning history is with us, right? Because we are all cues, right? I am a cue in the environment to my husband. I'm a cue to the environment with the people that I support in my environment. And so it is really important, because even if someone is in a state of deprivation, right, and they have a learning history with a certain cue, if that cue is not present, nothing's going to happen. Okay. All right. So that learning history and state, right, again, relates to how I behave. So relating this back to the example of the share slide, right, for those of you that are in a state of deprivation and want the opportunity to share, when you see that slide and based on your learning history of being like, anytime I share, I get positive attention and it's really great and I love it, you are going to share. I'm going to create an opportunity where it's going to increase the likelihood that you're going to speak up, you're going to raise your hand, you're like, yes, pick on me, I'm that person, I want to share, right? Based on your learning history in that state of deprivation or satiation, right, you may not share. So for those of you that you're ridden with social anxiety, you're in a state of satiation, you're like, absolutely not, I'm not going to share, right? That sharing behavior decreases. But what's really interesting, and this is where it gets really fun, is that you might engage in a completely other set of behaviors. So what's important to understand is that even if someone is satiated and they're not engaging in the behavior that you want, they're going to engage in something else, right? And so hypothetically speaking, it's possible that maybe someone clicked out of my room's presentation. They're like, oh my God, share slide. This person wants me to share. I'm out of here. I got to have my screen on. They're going to use my example. And what does that mean? They're going to use me as an example? Absolutely not. Something else is going to happen, right? So the behavior I want decreases, but also maybe some other undesirable behaviors increase, right? Behaviors that I don't want based on another set of cues. And look, it just kind of goes into a rabbit hole. But what's important to understand is if an individual is satiated, right, that behavior that I want is going to decrease. Okay, so now we're going back to that formula. And hopefully when you look at this formula now, you can kind of grasp or see it from a different perspective than when we started, right? So looking at this formula, right, our initial step is, okay, there's a state, right? Either in a state of deprivation or a state of satiation. And what's really, really cool, but where we have to be ethically minded, is you can manipulate the environment to create these states, okay? I can very easily create a state of deprivation in an individual and create a state of satiation in an individual, depending on how I interact with them and how I manipulate the environment, either adding cues, removing cues, right? If I know that, you know, my husband hasn't eaten anything all day and he's really, really hungry, there's a better chance that he's going to pick the restaurant that I want to go to, because at that point he doesn't care where we go because he's hungry, right? And so that's a little manipulation of, you know, engaging in behavior and setting up a motivating operation that results in a positive outcome for going to the restaurant that I want to go to, right? That's just a fun little example. But we, you know, knowing this stuff, it's important that we engage with it responsibly, right? So 2 states, deprivation, satiation. Deprivation, right, evokes behavior, increases the likelihood of behavior. Satiation decreases the likelihood of behavior, right? Because there's a cue in the environment, right? There has to be a cue present in order to signal for that behavior to occur. And then based on the learning history, right, that previous consequence when coming into contact with that cue, right, ties in whether or not someone is going to respond or not, right? There's always a learning history between the cue and the consequence, right, based on how we've behaved in the past. So this relationship is really, really important. All right, I'm going to do another check-in. How's everyone doing? Any questions? Okay. So here is another breakdown of this motivating operation, these states, right? And these states serving 2 functions, right? So one function is they have a change in behavior, right? You're either going to share or you're not going to share, right? And it also changes the effectiveness of the value of the outcome, right? So it either increases the value that, ooh, I'm going to get some positive accolades, right? Or that consequence has a decreased value because you don't want the social attention. You don't want those accolades, right? So 2 things are happening in a relationship to motivation, right? Based on the signal that comes up in your environment and how you behave, right? It's either because you value the outcome that's going to be gained, or you do not value the outcome that's going to be gained, right? If I've been drinking water all day, right? Simple example, and I become satiated, right? This water bottle continues to lose value, right? Every time I take a sip out of it and I quench my thirst, it continues to lose value until seeing it in the environment doesn't trigger any behavior, right? There's no value to this water bottle. I'm no longer thirsty. So again, motivation serves two functions: to increase or decrease behavior, and that's based on how I value what I see in my environment because of the outcome that I know it's going to come from my behavior. All right. So I'm really breaking this down because I want us all to understand what I just said. Okay. So the state here of motivation, and then I'm going to dive in and how this relates to real estate as well. I've given a couple examples, but on day one, I want to just dive in and break down the science so that I'm going to give you all a little homework assignment that I think you're going to have a lot of fun interacting with. But hopefully we can walk away with really understanding motivation today, because that was the purpose of this workshop. So this state, this motivation state, which increases or decreases the value of the consequence or outcome, right? So that's one of those functions, right? The change of effectiveness, the value of the outcome, right? Again, if I'm satiated, right, this isn't going to have much value because drinking water, right, isn't desirable, right? But if I'm deprived of water, it increases the value. And then, of course, the state affects your behavior related to assessing or avoiding the consequences based on its value, right? So depending on what state I'm in, right, I see the signal, I assess where I'm at, and all this is happening simultaneously. We don't think about, oh, I'm going to take a sip of water because it's going to quench my thirst, and that water bottle is very valuable. It's not how we think about our environment, right? But it is going to impact how we behave, right? Based on our history of those outcomes from the past. Okay, so I just want to break that down further, kind of highlight what we're talking about here. And lastly is this cue or signal, right? So the cue sets the occasion for behavior based on a history of consequences and MO states, right? The cue, the signal is really important, right? This is something that I talk to leaders about, like what is in your environment? What are your agents seeing, right? Because what they see matters. What's in your environment matters. How are you setting them up for success, right? Is there a task list? Is there a step-by-step for processes and procedures, right? Increase the likelihood that when they see something, they're going to do something, right? Because they need to. All right, very good. Okay, so just got through the sciencey part. I know that was a lot, but I wanted to relate this back to real estate because we're all here because we are in the real estate industry. And what inspired this workshop was I was in a meeting and somebody said, my agents are not producing, it's hard to keep them motivated. That's verbatim what I heard in this meeting. My agents are not producing, it's hard to keep them motivated, right? And so I wanted to transition into this because now that we have some fundamental basic understanding of what true motivation is, right? The next question is, well, what state is your agent in at any given point in time, right? Are they in a state of deprivation? Are they in a state of satiation? What cues do you have in the environment that are signaling for them to engage in the productive behaviors that you want, right? Or even for yourself, what does your environment look like at any given point in time? What signals, what cues do you have in your environment that is evoking behavior, right? That is increasing the likelihood that you're gonna perform, right? So really, really important to start thinking about as you think about motivation. All right. So here's a little secret that I want to leave for us for today. And that secret is if behavior is occurring, there is a cue relevant to that behavior in the environment, and there is an MO in place. So when we go back to this quote, my agents are not producing, it's hard to keep them motivated. Well, if they're not engaging in productive behaviors, or if you yourself are not engaging in behaviors that would be related to production, it's because you're doing something else. You're not just sitting on your hands all day at your desk or twiddling your thumbs or just staring at the wall. No, you're doing something. It may not be related to production or increasing the likelihood of the success you want in your life. Something is happening, right? And what is it that's happening? And why is it happening, right? So again, if behavior is occurring, there is a cue in the environment at that moment relevant to that behavior. And there is an MO in place, right? And I fall into this all the time. I'm notorious for having multiple tabs up on the top of my computer. It's like I'm a tab junkie. And if I have tabs up that are distracting, if I've got Facebook or Instagram or, you know, Amazon, and I'm trying to engage in a production behavior and I see that tab in that moment, right? My state fluctuates, right? I go into a state of deprivation. Oh, I really want to order, those cool sponges that I saw the other day on, Shark Tank, where it like cleans everything but doesn't scratch the pans. And now I'm in a rabbit hole engaging in a behavior that doesn't relate to my production, right? Because the cue was there that was relevant to that behavior that I engaged in. So that is one of the best secrets that I can give you to walk away with today, to help you understand what's happening in your environment and the environment of others. Okay. So, I know that was a lot. This is probably your brain right now. Like, oh my God, get me out of here. Pack my bags. That was intense. What just happened, right? Hopefully not. I wanted to put that up as just a fun little photo for you. But, I'm exhausted talking about that. So I can imagine what you're all experiencing right now as well. But, don't fret. We're going to break this down over the next couple of weeks together and continue to digest it, because I want you to understand it. This is powerful information. It's a science. There's loads and years of empirically validated research just on the formula that I shared with you. And if you learn it and you master it, you will have the outcomes that you want, and others will have the outcomes that they want. So stick with it. Again, I've been to workshops where, the first 20 minutes, someone's talking about something completely unrelated to what I came to learn. And I didn't want to do that with y'all. I'm like, you know what? They're here to learn about motivation and the science of performance. I'm going to give it to them. So hopefully you can appreciate that. And if not, let me know. Because I'm going to provide you a homework assignment, and then I'm going to provide my email and phone number. I'm a big believer in open sourcing, free open sourcing. So if you have any questions, please reach out to me. But here's your homework assignment until next week. I want you to observe your behavior, right? And in relationship to your behavior, I want you to think back to that formula and think, what cues or signals are in my environment, right? And this is going to be really, really fun. Now that you have the inside track on what really motivation is, because it's a science, right? It's a science of organisms and behavior, right? All organisms behave. So when you have the inside track on something, it becomes a little bit more fun, right? You see it from a different perspective. So observe your behavior. What cues or signals are in your environment while you're behaving, while you're interacting, right? If you get off track, or if you're on track, why are you on track? Why are you successful? Why are you getting distracted? Why are you doing other things? And what states are you in when you're behaving, right? Start understanding your own behavior. You can understand your own behavior, right? And notice how I said, observe your behavior, right? Because if you're a leader, if you're a coach, if you have a team, or even, you're a parent, it's more fun to observe other behaviors of others, right? But I want you to start understanding your own, right? Get familiar with yourself, and also be compassionate with yourself, right? But what states are you in when you behave, right? Are you deprived? Are you satiated, right? Because regardless of what state you're in, something's happening. And are you behaving towards or away from your goals, right? That's a big one. Are you behaving towards or away from your goals? And again, do this exercise this week as you're behaving. Okay, why am I doing this? Well, because this popped up, or this went off, or this pinged, or this was shiny. Oh well, I'm a little deprived right now, or oh, I'm satiated, so I'm avoiding, right? I'm engaging in avoidant related behaviors. Is that getting me closer to accomplishing my goals? Or wow, this is something that is really going to help me accomplish my goal for the day, for the hour, for the week, for the year, for the quarter. Okay. All right. And thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being patient with the science. I know it's a lot. My name is Sarah Arlington. This is my email, sarah@roosterhomes.com. And there's my number. If you email me, I will send you these slides. If you have any questions and you just want to chit chat or pick my brain, again, I'm a big believer in open sourcing and just providing as much information as I can to support you in any way that I can. But that's me. So thank you so much. And I'm going to leave a little bit of time here for if there's any questions, curiosities, thoughts.
Yeah, Sarah, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So I know you started with, what is the state or the motivation, the satiation or deprivation. For those of us that are like hiring new team members or have team members, what kind of behaviors or cues can we try to observe off the bat so we can try to figure that out like sooner than later?
Great question. Thank you. An important question is how much money is in your savings account right now? Just kidding. That was a joke. But, if someone has a part-time job or is coming out, transitioning from a full-time job, that's going to compete with their motivation to be a full-time agent or commit to a team or commit to engaging in the behaviors that drive success. One thing, and this is going to answer your question a different way. There's something called correspondence of behavior. And so, usually when people show up to an interview or they usually have their representative, they're putting their best foot forward. And I think there's something to be said for the way that you ask questions that you can observe once someone is hired or onboarded that match and align with what they told you initially in that meeting. You can also test for this through a series of interviews, or as you're bringing someone on, right? You ask an initial question like, oh, tell me, why you want to do this. Tell me about like how you plan your day. Tell me how you show up for things, right? So you're asking questions. They're giving you that feedback. You're taking high-level notes, and then you're going to send them an activity where they will demonstrate what they just told you in that previous meeting. Oh, you told me you like to show up to work on time, or you told me that you're really, a go-getter and you accomplish things and you overachieve and you like to, do things in a certain way. Okay, well, I'm going to test that and see if there's correspondence between what you say and what you do, your verbal behavior compared to your observable behavior. That's how I would answer that question. It's, to gauge someone's motivation right out the gate without seeing their behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, I guess, verbal behavior is a behavior, and how people answer questions, you can kind of gauge their motivation. But I think, for me, bringing someone on and making sure they're motivated, if there's a competing workforce or a competing stream of income, in my experience, that's been challenging, right? Because if someone has cash flow, it's going to compete with them, transacting right away. Right? And unless there's some other intrinsic motivators, like they'd love to get out there and get in front of people. And there's other things that relate to what would motivate those performance related behaviors. So maybe asking those types of questions, right? Do you
Makes
like
sense.
getting in front of people? Do you like talking on the phone? Do you like, will you continue to engage in behavior even if you get hung up on and get the door slammed in your face, right?
Right.
Those kinds of things. Yeah.
A lot of sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sarah, I just want to thank you and acknowledge you for this amazing information, some of which in the past I've paid a lot of money to observe and hear. So
Yeah.
it's amazing that you're willing to share all of this, and I look forward to future sessions. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for your feedback and thank you for attending. My pleasure. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, it's incredible. All this information is really free. But unfortunately, because, there's a science behind it, it's difficult to grasp. And, if I can disseminate the science in a way that relates to what we're doing and makes sense, then it can be really impactful and empowering for a lot of us. And I think there's a lot of ways that motivation is, talked about that you're like, I'm just not getting results, or, people talk about mindset, get into a mindset. Okay, well, what is the mind, right? It's like, what is the mind, and how do I engage in a way that is going to bring positive outcomes into my environment? So yeah, anything I could do to help out, for sure. I'm a big nerd. I love to talk about this stuff. So for me, I'm constantly in a state of deprivation around nerding out. So feel free to exploit my state of deprivation and, call me anytime or reach out. Have any questions. I love talking about this stuff, and I love helping other people succeed. So.
Awesome. Yeah. And so you'll be doing this room once a week, right? Every Thursday at 1.
Yeah, I'm gonna, I got that homework assignment. So for next week, I just really want to hop on and hear people's feedback. My plan is to have, next week probably won't be as complex as today, but I want to, start out with a recap. Maybe those of you that maybe logged in late or didn't get a chance to tune in early, because it is something that has to be digested. And so next week, I definitely want to hear everyone's feedback about their own behavior, their own, cues in the environment, their own states. And I want to start just breaking down examples and talking about it as a group. Like, how can we take this formula and now apply it, right? And start to create outlines for ourselves, our teams, if we're coaching individuals, like how can I, like questions like you asked, Joanna, right? Where we actually have time to let's unpack that. Like, let's say we're doing an interview. What are some ways that we can set ourselves up for success to kind of evaluate for some level of motivation and pre-qualify someone that we feel is going to be a good fit, because there is a state of deprivation there. And I think it's important to understand, based on that person's state of deprivation, now as I bring them into my team or my environment or my brokerage, what resources can I now set up as cues to trigger that behavior, because I know they're in a state of deprivation. And so I think those are things we can start unpacking together and talking through that I think, is gonna help everyone understand the science behind motivation, deprivation, satiation, cues, behaviors, that history of reinforcement, understanding the history of consequences and how it triggers our behavior, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, I'm excited.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you everyone for being a part of this. And